Hey everybody, and welcome back to Pre-Law Talk. My name is Joshua Garlick. I'm a BYUI Comm student applying to law school. This podcast has been brought to you in order to inform students about pre-law, discussing topics like the LSAT, the application process, law schools, and some advice. So, if you listened to us last time, I mentioned that I was going to be going over some of the analytical reasoning this time. I'm actually going to take that back. We're going to talk about logical reasoning because I feel like it's a smaller step in between reading comprehension and logic games. So, logical reasoning, this is one of the most important sections for you to get down because out of the 4 sections that are graded within your LSAT score, 2 of the sections will be logical reasoning sections. And so you really want to get this down pat and, get good at it so you can score really well in the LSAT, get into the school of your dreams, practice law. That's the goal. So what a logical reasoning question looks like, an individual question will contain a stimulus, a question, and the answers. The stimulus is simply a brief argument. The questions will be more precise than the other 2 sections because they'll ask you to do a specific job, and you'll have to know what that job is and how to do it. And then you'll have your answers. This section is different than other sections because this is the only section that you should read the question before you read the stimulus. And this only works with this section because the question will identify the type of job that you're going to be doing with the stimulus in order to answer the question. So we'll talk about a couple of the types of logical reasoning questions. Number 1, identify the flaw. So you're going to, figure out what the conclusion is, figure out what the support is, and find where that hole or that gap in reasoning is. So you'll identify the flaw, answer the question. Next, number 2, there are strengthening questions and there are weakening questions, where you will either strengthen the argument with additional support for the conclusion or weaken the argument with some counter support to the argument. Or expose the flaw, I guess. Number 3 is required assumption problems, where you will be required to come up with an assumption that makes sense based off of the conclusion and the premises that have been given. There's the number 4, principle-based, where you'll be given a principle and then how that principle is used in an actual situation, and you might be asked to apply that same principle to another situation. And then you'll choose that answer. Number 5, inference, where you'll make an inference based off of the support and the argument that you have, kind of come up with an additional conclusion that can be based off of the information. Number 6, what are we on? 6. Match the flaw, which is where you read the stimulus and it will have a flaw. You'll identify that flaw, and then you'll look in the answers for a matching flaw. Pretty simple, straightforward, but it's a lot more complex than it sounds, and especially match the flaw. Number 7, identify the reasoning, where that's pretty much figuring out the premise to the argument. There's a lot more different types of questions. I won't go over all of them because there's so many and they're very diverse. So the best thing you can do before you take the actual LSAT is to familiarize yourself with what questions are being asked and how frequently those questions are being asked, so that way you can increase the rate of identification and be able to answer these questions, pretty rapidly. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about reading the stimulus, the things that you need to look for in there, answering questions, and some challenges that you will face within this section. So after you've read the question, you've identified your job, you're going to read the stimulus. And for every stimulus you read, you want to do 3 things. You want to identify the conclusion, identify the support to the conclusion, and identify the flaw in the reasoning, that hole between the conclusion and the support. All the questions within this section will have a hole, will have a flaw, and you need to understand that flaw in order to answer the questions correctly. Next, answering the questions. So after you've identified the conclusion, the flaw, and the support, it'll be easier to answer those questions because you'll already have those at hand. So, identify the conclusion questions should happen almost immediately for you. It's the same with identify the flaw and identify the support. Strengthen, weaken questions. An important note to take on this is that within the answers, there will only be one correct answer. So there will only be one answer that actually strengthens or weakens, depending on what you're looking for, the argument. The other answers, the wrong answers, will do the opposite or will not impact the argument at all. So when looking at eliminating answers for a strengthened argument, you want to look for ones that weaken the argument or do not strengthen. There should be only one that strengthens it. You shouldn't have to debate between which one strengthens it the most or which one weakens it the most. Another tip for match the flaw questions. These questions within this section are the most time-consuming questions that you'll face. So what I normally do with match the flaw questions is I'll put a little star or I'll circle the number or identify it in some way so that I know to come back to it, because I'll skip it and I'll move on and I'll get as many questions as I possibly can right before, if I have extra time, I'll come back and do the match the flaw questions. Normally there's not more than 1 or 2 within a section, so they're really time consuming. It's better that you get more answers correct and get to more answers than to waste a bunch of time with match the flaw questions. Some of the challenges you'll face. This section really challenges you with changing the job that you're doing within every single question. So there is no line of thinking between the questions. You'll be switching what you're thinking about within the argument from one question to the next. There won't be any questions back to back that ask for the same thing. So you really got to get good at switching what you're focusing on. The next challenge is really your ability to identify flawed reasoning. And this is really the primary purpose of this section, to identify flaws within arguments. And of course, the last, as all other sections, the timing. But if you practice enough, you shouldn't have a problem with timing with these sections, as long as you can identify the flaws and what your job is within each individual question. If you have any other questions about this section of the test, please reach out to me, ask me questions. I can look things up, I can figure it out. Thank you for listening to Pre-Law Talk. Once again, my name is Josh, and hope to catch you next time. Special shout out to bensounds.com. This is where I get all my free royalty-free music. bensounds.com puts it out. Check it out.